Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you find yourself in this world today. It's quite an exciting day in South Africa because we are finally able to go and buy alcohol. So I'm glad this isn't a live show because no one is probably listening. So to all those people standing in queues, good luck to you, stacked up, and forward and onward and upward we go. We are getting a little bit of freedom. But other than that, I am very excited, almost as excited about being able to buy booze. No, actually, I lie, much more. Is that I get to speak to Wendy Spinks today. And I've known Wendy for a long time, and she is one of those people that continuously amazes me. She is so talented in terms of all the work she does. And she evolves constantly as a person and in her work, and that's why I'm very excited to chat to her, because I think she's got a lot to share in terms of how business can be creative, evolved, moved on, shut down, recreated. She's got so much advice for anyone looking to start their own business. So I think this is going to be an absolutely awesome interview. So thank you, Wendy. And welcome to the I Work For Me podcast. Yay.
Thank you so much, Melina. and you're such an inspiration to me. So thank you for inviting me to come and chat. And yes, what an exciting day it is in South Africa, even though it seems to be rather chaotic in other parts of the world today. The South Africans are standing in queue for booze. At least no protests as yet.
Yeah, exactly. There are no protests. We're all in solidarity outside the bottle stores. So it's quite an interesting day for us. So, and at least it's all peaceful. So yay, you win some, you lose some. But thanks again for not being at the bottle store and for being here. So it's great. But Wendy, I think the first thing I like to share with people is, what was your dream when you were a little girl? What were you going to be when you grew up?
My earliest memory was actually that I wanted to be an actress. And I think that actually was a dream for me for a really long time. When I was at school, I really loved drama, and in English, I really enjoyed film studies. And I remember when I got to go to Grahamstown Festival with the English class, that was a huge highlight for me and really inspiring. But I think also it might have actually started when we were much younger, like at 5 or 6, when we started having concerts in our garden where we lived in Centurion. And, I would also get the whole street involved, and I'd also be selling tickets to the whole street at that young age. And I think that might have been where my entrepreneurial spirit also started blossoming back then, selling those tickets. And then when I was about 11, I actually started selling neighborhood's clothing for jumble sales, because I was wanting to buy a horse and all the tack and all the stuff that went with it. And maybe that was the only indicator then that I'd go into a fashion career at that time. But yeah, I didn't become an actress.
But that's lovely that you, no matter what creative endeavor you undertook, whether it was the acting or the clothing, there seemed to be a definite business element to it. So I think that definitely was the start of that entrepreneurial mindset and how you made things work. Definitely. So please tell us, where have you ended up? What are you up to at the moment? Tell us a little bit about your evolution. You kind of hinted that you'd ended up in fashion. So maybe kind of tell us your journey and where you find yourself now.
Okay, so it's quite a long story because, and as you said, it's evolved. So yes, reinvention really is real. I might be on my 4th, 5th, or even the 6th incarnation of what Wendy does, if you know what I mean. So it's not a short answer. But I went into fashion design and I studied business management as well. And when I was 21, I started my own fashion label, which was Carnaby House. And then a few years later, I decided to move off to London to go be a small fish in a big pond and explore couture life on a larger scale. Then I moved back from the UK, and then I was in the midst of setting up if you can believe it, a mountain biking tour company with my dad, which was called Littleberg Adventures, which was to our family farm in the Drakensberg. And we did some trips. But after having lived in London, I really realized that the pace on the farm was actually way too slow for me after London, and that tourism was actually not quite me, even though the mountain biking was awesome. It also really wasn't creative enough. Anyway, so then I got into styling for some magazines, ad agencies, and that kind of thing as a freelancer, which my sister actually drew me into when I got home. And then I started a bridal wholesale company. I opened a shop, I closed a shop. And then we started a sports brand called Verb Design, which I actually started with my sister and a friend who was in the pro cycling circuit. And we started with mountain biking clothing, and then we got into golf clothing. And we were sort of at about 150 stores that we were in around the country. And then we hit some really major manufacturing issues and disasters, and I found myself basically in court trying to defend the brand and the brand damage and the losses, etc., which was quite an experience, and all while having a brand new baby and being a new mom. All of this kind of was happening at the same time, so that ended unpleasantly, even though at the time we actually had fulfilled and delivered our first R1 million corporate clothing contract, but it all fell apart in this whole big court case in the end. But I was still painting and styling at the time, and I was so lucky actually. I had this ongoing painting contract for Kauai to do all the original art for all the stores that they were opening at the time. They were opening many across the country, so that was a real gift. You know, I had Ella, but I was just able to paint and actually earn a living from that painting back then. Then I found myself, very strangely, creating animated TV shows for preschoolers, which is a long story how I got into it, but anyway, we'll try and keep it short. But I was now diving into the world of human behavior, human potential. I was studying Jung classes in the evenings, weekly, and then I got into training with Dr. John DeMartini in human potential, which was also great. And I had this idea to create a TV series for preschoolers that could be like The Secret, the movie The Secret for kids. That's kind of like where my idea kind of started with. And it was like, you know, in a world where thoughts become things and absolutely everything is possible. And it was with this wonderful mindset that I went out into this very exciting and very complex world of animation. And I actually landed up as a creative producer with my own company called 0 Point Studios from 2010, which was very cool. Saw me taking trips to Cannes like twice a year to sell my stories, you know, and all the stories were really infused with my ideas on expansion and transformation, you know, human potential basically, and selling that to the global marketplace. I also lectured in animation and at film schools for a little while. And I mentored a lot of creators up and coming along the way too. And I found this experience of the last decade actually incredibly fulfilling, and being able to express myself and tell stories and work on a multitude of projects has just been absolutely awesome. It really has been incredible while I've been living here by the sea in Cape Town, being able to do it, but it just didn't work financially. Like it's a really long game. It's not a short game type of business, and in the end a decade just was too long to sustain it, and it got actually really hairy, to be honest, and my financial situation really came to a head, and where I had to like think about selling my house to get out of debt, and you know, even really extreme. So it became a time of like really deep self-reflection again. and I had to really look at what my life was demonstrating, you know, what was showing up in my experience and what patterns were repeating. And I really had to get radically honest about it all. So it began this massive deep dive, if you like, where I had to go back to my core strengths, my skills, my wants, my desires, my beliefs, my fears, and my blocks. And I had to find this way through all of this, while sort of realizing that my ultimate goal had actually become to know myself. I had always been seeking the truth, and I just realized that this life journey was actually taking me on this journey to discover what I really, really, really wanted. It was no longer this journey of, you know, can I find the great career or the big success after all that experience, or after all that failure that I experienced. It actually became about, you know, this, my path and purpose that I couldn't really turn back from. And I realized that I wanted to know the truth, the real truth about who I am and why I'm here. And I really wanted to experience what it was like to live in a state of permanent flow. But now, to explain that, because that might sound odd, I realized that, you know, I haven't told you parts of the stories. Some of it's missing. Like, so while I was in the UK, I actually fell out of a tree in a freak accident, and I broke my neck, and I had a near-death experience. And it was this amazing spiritual awakening, actually. But in that near-death experience, I accessed this state of a pure white light, almost nothingness. And it left me changed and unhinged for many years. It was like this experience, to explain, of like really no time and no gravity, but at the same time it had this like all pervasive magnetism, and I just knew it was home. And so I guess the meander since 1999, when that happened, on this inner journey, was really dictating what was happening on the outside. And that was acting to really remind me all the time of, every time I forgot, you know, the true desires of my soul, and it kept taking me back. So really last year, as I was saying, I got to this place where I felt like I had to be willing to give absolutely everything up and find a blank page. And it meant that I had to give up this latest identity that I had, which was actually really hard, because I had, the last decade, I've been loving it. And I had to let go of so many of my projects. And that was so hard, because I was so personally infused in all of them, actually. But I felt, you know, circumstantially, I was shown that it was time to change, but also felt called to that change, to be more authentic and to really align my vocation and creative expression with my natural talents and my soul desires. And even in a more direct and, say, holistic way than I've ever done before. And package that as maybe an offering or service of value, if you know what I mean. So I guess from there I started to write more for myself and create courses on topics that I really like. And I studied a bunch of courses, and I still am, actually, and in art therapy, life coaching, well-being, and on spirituality, all these things that I deeply care about. And I started sort of, you know, like taking my life experiences and putting it together as, you know, could my life demonstrate what my offering is in a way, you know, can your weaknesses actually become your greatest gifts, or your failures become those gifts that you can give away in life. So now I'm offering flow life coaching and art life coaching. So I've like really tried to connect my love for art and creativity with this, you know, my being wanting to share what I have to offer, I suppose, through that. So facilitating workshops, obviously not now since we're all in lockdown, but soon, and maybe doing some retreats would be great. And then I've taken that course that I wrote, which is called the Character Dive, you know, and it's based on my personal character dive, and created that into my first ebook. I'm going to think I'm going to do it as a series of 3 books, because it's like a 3-day character dive,
Wow.
which can be done over 3 weeks, and do it as a 3 series. And then I'm working on another book called I Let Go of the Rope, which is, you know, a personal account of some of my life experiences and falling out of the tree, but really around the art of letting go. So yeah, that was the the long story, I suppose, or the short side of the long story. You'll have to read the book for the rest.
Well, if you read the book, you know that. So there's so much in there that I think is so valuable in terms of what people can actually draw out of that. There's, you know, you going on quite an epic journey, which I'm so glad you're going to turn into a book, because there's going to be, I'm sure, lots of beautiful insights in that. But things that kind of stood out in terms of what you were saying was that you had started, I mean, if we just take 0 Point Studios, for example, and, you know, I had, you know, met you down in Cape Town when you were working on a lot of those projects. So, you know, and you throw yourself 150% into a project, you know, which is what the project is fantastic. But, you know, you've been doing that for a long time, and then to let go of that business or that project, were you able, I mean, let's look at it from 2 perspectives. There's the, okay, can I sell this on to someone or pass it on, or do you shut it down? And then there's also the emotional attachment. And what I really liked what you said was the persona associated to that. So, you know, if I look at myself, then, you know, sample size of 1, I used to be in, you know, advertising in the healthcare industry, and so knew about doctors and healthcare communications and patients and what that needed and what that required. And that was a persona that I would wear, and that was how I presented myself in the business world. And it took a long time to not be that person. And so, you know, I think for a lot of people who the persona is very important within their current business function, I'm the big, strong plumber, or I'm the, you know, hotshot corporate career girl. And then maybe now that's been pulled out from under your feet, and you find yourself and you go, whoa, feeling naked. Maybe you can kind of talk about how you unbundled your business from a business perspective, and how you unbundled yourself from a personal perspective.
Yeah, those are great questions, and both huge in terms of the experience as well. So from a business perspective, also it's kind of like didn't happen all at once, because you could see it coming, right? So you can see this happening, and you're watching it happening, and you're kind of getting a sense that you need to start letting go. So it's kind of, I would say it's been over a process of maybe 18 months of knowing, seeing a bit of a train wreck, and then trying to, okay, so how could I do this differently? And from a business side, I did immediately see that there were issues within how I was doing business, hoping that the South African model could somehow work, or that the SABC somehow magically wouldn't fall apart again, etc. So I kind of, you know, that wasn't happening. So I realized that what I needed to do is, I had worked on this stuff for 10 years. There was a lot of IP created, and could I find partners in other countries that could take on those IPs, and then I could almost remove myself from them. And also, of course, I had investors involved, so I was trying really hard not to disappoint them, which I hate doing. So I was trying for a point to sort of pull myself out, find partners, and then hopefully have those partners be able to carry it forward. So having sort of giving up a lot of control, and more kind of stepping back into sort of a creator role, less than, say, I need to be a producer and bring the money. So I tried that, and a couple of the IPs worked. We got one project in with a studio in LA. We had one with Canada. And there was another project that we kind of had with a French partner. But then we got money at some point for that project from the NFVF, which is so frustrating. And I just wanted to speak to that, because that's kind of been this weird experience on like, how do you let go? You've got these things, all these projects, there's huge disappointments along the way, but then suddenly it looks like it's up again. So it's like this bubble of you up and down, if you know what I mean, on this like weird thing. And then do you give up now because you worked 10 years and can I let go? Because suddenly you got money and it looks like, you know, you could develop that and maybe there's a chance. But, you know, it's so that kind of this up and down. And eventually I had to actually, because I'd also just won last year I won it in the November before, a residency to France on one of our other projects. So again, you're like, oh, maybe this wants to work, you know, and sort of you go with it. But I think what I then realized was, can I see what's behind the business? So while I was, you know, wanting to find the partners to answer your question, to set it up in ways that I could remove myself, but still possibly in the future have passive income, but so that I could turn and face and do other stuff, I was also saying to myself, okay, so here you are with this opportunity to go to France, but what's the real reason? You know, so is it just to go and work on this project, or was the gift of a month in France away from my entire life a gift of actually doing what you then asked me is, how did I do this personally? And it was very interesting. I mean, I worked really hard on that project, but it was such an interesting project. It was so parallel with everything I was experiencing. And I was actually doing a documentary on a homeless woman who actually found herself through her expression of art. And so she had gone through some very dark times in her life, and there were so many parallel things on our journey. So it was a very bizarre experience. And she eventually started drawing in the park to get out of her own head and away from her fears and actually distract herself from actually wanting to be violent herself. It's a really long story, but it was this project that we were working on. But I started to see the parallels of my own life and how I had used art and how I got into painting in the UK. And I saw her, you know, her therapeutic use of it. But then I also used this time while I was away in France to just stop and every day just allow to and let everything just be, you know, sit with my fears, my own fears of being homeless, right? Because I was now very possibly about to lose my house or have the banks foreclosed, and all of this stuff was facing me. And these were fears that she had faced, and in our interviews we had back and forth. So now here I am in having this parallel experience, and it was just sort of taking this entire month of just allowing the story to sort of come through. And at some point I realized it wasn't only her story, and it wasn't only about the story. It was also about me completely finding a new way, or a new, you know, something new was actually being birthed. And it was like, that was almost a huge catalyst of change. And it was really interesting because it took me outside of my life. So I became like really objective, and I could see the patterns, and I could see all sorts of things that I had been, you know, or had fallen into over the past decade. And so that way, in that way, it became easier. So that was a year ago, but it's still, I knew I was letting go. And then I was building on courses, and I was writing, but you still had these other projects. And then I started to lecture. It's sort of, so it was like without rambling on, it became like a stepping of skis, if you know what I mean. Like your circumstances are pushing you, you're pushing you. They're not letting up, thank goodness, in a way. Because if they let up, I would maybe just have gone back, if you know what I mean. But they kept pushing me and holding the pressure that I had to keep, no matter how terrifying it was, to just be able to say, so what if I'm not a writer or a creator or any of the things I've ever been? So what if I'm none of that? And can I be okay with that? And it's like, it's literally the experience stripped me of my own ego to a place where it was actually quite beautiful. And from there, I've been able to to build every day into like, okay, but who do I really want to be? So it became exciting again, because then I felt like I finally got to my blank page point. But it took sort of stripping to get to that moment. So yeah, it's been a hell of a road, but incredibly, every experience that I've had, even in the old, even in this old identity of mine, it was working with me to realize a new one. And eventually at some point the funding didn't happen for that project anymore, and things were going on, and I kind of realized maybe that wasn't the point of that project. Maybe the gift was me being able to address my own fears or look in the mirror, and maybe she gifted me so much more through that experience, and that time in France allowed that as well. Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I think it does, because what is quite interesting and is that ability to see fault or to recognize patterns, or to see someone's errors in how they do things quite easily from your perspective. But what I learned kind of going through a yoga journey was the things that maybe irk you about someone else, or the patterns that you see so clearly in other people, are often your own as well. And
yes,
so
exactly.
that
They're beautiful triggers, aren't they?
yes, yeah, those triggers are often your own issues. But we don't want to associate ourselves with our triggers and our patterns. It's fine and see it in someone else and then comment, from the sideline. And I think you were definitely gifted with that opportunity to work with this woman in France. How amazing is that ability to go and work on a project and be gifted that personal reflection, if you want to put it that way. And not to say that you are her or anything like that, but to be given that opportunity to see things sometimes clearly when you are open to it. And I think that's amazing, and that you actually had that opportunity. But also, I think in your process of kind of unbundling your business, as you say, it wasn't, we shut the doors today and then tomorrow we started something new. It was a process of kind of cascading down and up at the same time.
Yeah.
You were slowly closing something down, and building something up. Okay, so I think that often that's what happens in business. My parents owned retail outlets, and over, I would say, 2 or 3 years, the business started to die, and it was an environmental change within the retail industry in terms of what they were selling. And slowly, the business started to die, but often you hold on to it because you can't believe it's actually happening. Well, you don't want to, but then you live in denial for a long time. And then you also start grappling and blaming, and there's all these interesting kind of I want to almost say stages of emotion that go into this business change. And it's important to be able to start building something else while that other thing is going.
It's unraveling.
Exactly. So very interesting. I think if people find themselves in that situation where that's that little gut feel, or that little voice in your head that says it's not going so great, you need to start maybe looking elsewhere, or shifting within your business, or shifting within yourself to have a look at that.
Exactly. And I think it is a shift both within yourself, probably with yourself first. But it was difficult. I mean, it's not easy. And it sometimes it's subtle. Like the reasons could be subtle. When I looked, I knew I had to be in alignment. I knew I had to be doing, this purpose of why I was here. But I was also so confused in many ways, because I'd look back at the last decade and go, but I was doing what I loved, So, but I have been passionate. I gave it my all. So I'm like, so what wasn't aligned? What was wrong, or what wasn't I doing that I now need to put down. And I think that's even a longer and a bigger story, but it was subtle, and I really had to dive into it and get to a place where I was completely okay with letting it all go, but actually we're also realizing that it was like a way I do things is different, like an approach or an energy about how I do things and approach money or my work life or the work-life balance, which wasn't there. That was at the heart of also what was going wrong, if you know what I mean. So it was a mixture in with that. And I also, it's interesting because I'm not entirely sure that whole life has to be or is entirely over, right? Mm-hmm. But what felt very clear, and this is a lesson I've learned over and over, is that I have to be prepared to let it go entirely, because the new door doesn't open until I let it go entirely. Yes. And be prepared to literally, okay, if that comes back, how exciting. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So that's where, when they say you've got to let go, you literally, that's what I feel like I was asked to do, was be willing to give it all up, and to give up knowing anything of myself in order to recreate myself.
Yeah, and how brave. So I think it's like you've shed an entire skin, which is a decade thick. That's a lot of time. That's a career, and you've taken it off and you've let it go, and that's super, super brave. So kudos to you. The other thing I wanted to say was that when you said, about learning how to do business differently, I've noticed how often people will maybe start a business or invest in a business and run it in a certain way. We all have a particular style and a way of doing things, and that's absolutely perfect. But then maybe something goes wrong, they close the business down and a new business, and run it and run it and run it. And same thing, things go bad. So, and I'm always like, oh, okay, after business number 2, you need to start thinking about what's going on. Like, where is the problem? Like, common denominator is you. So what are you doing that's wrong? And how are you going to work on that and do that differently? How are you going to run your next business differently? I'll use my parents again, because I don't think they listen to these. So that's great. We'll just keep on using them as in terms of when my parents, when they eventually closed down their shop empire, my dad went through kind of a few iterations of small business, and eventually when he started his new business, he ran it completely differently. He ran it from home. He never ever paid rent ever again to a big landlord. He never had staff again. He worked closely with my mom, and they built up this business, and they ran it super, super lean without much debt. And it was a completely different way of running how they'd run the business. So kudos to him. He learned his lesson and he shifted, and that business was therefore successful, and he eventually sold it when he retired. So it's important in that thing where you were able to recognize yourself, the thing that wasn't working, whether it was an alignment or whether it was a way of doing business or both. Recognize that and said, whoa, if I'm starting from scratch, I need to look at this differently. And I think that is so important as a take home in terms of how businesses go forward. Sure, maybe this didn't work, but we're not going to go and start new and do it exactly the same way. That is not going to work. Yeah. So, I mean, just on that kind of trajectory, what would you say in terms of starting a business and what you have learned? I mean, you've got 10 years, and I'm so glad you had those 10 years, because your book is going to be, you've got content inside your head. So what, in terms of setting up this next business and how you do it, what are your key things? that you're going to take into this new business of yours, that you're going to do differently, better, improved?
So what, for me, it's going to be, and I think this is important for everyone, is that it's going to be unique to everyone, right? So what I'm going to share is like, so this is what I'm going to do, and I don't suggest everyone does it unless it's aligned for them. Yeah. So for me, this new thing is literally what, as I mentioned the word alignment. So it's this like diving deeply into myself, knowing what I was actually, so aligning myself with my values, aligning myself with who I really am. So in this deep dive experience, I have driven so deep, and now I have to bring that forward. So I have to bring all of me forward, but it's also like with the knowing of who I really am, and then holding that in this sort of, you know, there's a lot of it that's kind of spiritual at the same time, and that's just like part of my journey. It's where I've ended up. But it's also like knowing that this whole masculine paradigm is over. This patriarchal thing is, the way of doing things is done. And we know the feminine has risen on the planet. It's already here. Yes. Whether or not, you know, like right now we can see the old control is hanging in there. It's fighting hugely out in the streets today, you know, but it's actually a new world that we're going into. And so I like to see it and relate that to myself and to the way I'm going to operate in, and work in such alignment in myself where I have to catch myself. Am I going back to that masculine way of doing things? Or am I going to work in this new operating system, which is almost like someone said it and beautifully on another platform I was listening to, and she said, it's not that we're opening a new chapter of the book, it's that it's a new book. That book we put down, we started a new one. And for me, it's like, it's not that I've upgraded, like I had to earlier with Zoom, to a new level of operating, or on my Mac, you know, or whatever it might be, to have this new operating system. It's actually new hardware. There's a new software brand in town, and it's feminine. So this is like what I'm applying. So it means I'm literally, in every way and shape of what I'm doing, and the way I'm navigating myself through business, but it's now so integrated, like it's like my vocation, or my action to be so aligned. It's like everything must become in putting down and unlearning control, or that push, and the push pull, the driving, the plan, the strategy, the go, you know, which it was very much, you know, I was quite a masculine girl, actually, you know. I was a tomboy growing up, and it was very natural, and I'm sure from any woman, to survive in this world, we had to be quite masculine, right? So I've always been that way, and it's like it's perhaps this has been the toughest thing, of literally putting all of that down and actually saying, okay, I'm going to rewire for this new feminine operating system, and I'm going to align with these feminine principles, which is really this intuition-led way of being, if you like, or I'm inspired to act, and then I'm authentic in my action, and I'm vulnerable, supportive, you know, open to co-creation and collaboration. You have to trust more, all of these feminine kind of principles, and it is about being more reflective, receptive, empathetic, and compassionate. You know, and it's actually quite natural, but maybe we just kept it to when we were being a mom. I don't know, you know. Ooh. So it's like, but bringing that to business and working from that place. So it's like, okay, so how does that look? And it's difficult, because then you might be, okay, now I'm going to market something, but I'm like, okay, so how did I used to do it? And now, how am I going to do it if I'm going to apply a new principle? So at times it feels like being water to me. Is just right now how I can best describe it. It's like literally learning how to be like water. You know, it's this feeling of, I've also got to have really firm boundaries at the same time, but I'm kind of like this more open and flowing way of being. So that is really what I'm trying to bring to everything that I'm doing right now. And I'm really a long way from doing or being anything in this new phase. But that's what I'm playing with. Yeah.
Lovely. I love that idea of, well, there's two. There's doing things from a feminine perspective, and also then rewiring and kind of, chucking out the old system and
those old patterns, right? And because I mean, I was a workaholic, and it didn't work. So it's like, it didn't work. So bring the new thing and rewire all those behaviors. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm sure
it's hard.
You feel better, but I'm sure you feel better in you and in your skin. So it's it's more fitting almost. And that's really, really exciting. And I love that idea. And yes, if only we could live in a very much more a feminine world of existence, and hopefully we will get there
I think we will. I think that's where we're going. So I really believe it is. So it's like, this is where I'm feeling I asked for this, I want to know the truth. I want to know why I'm here. I pushed for this. So I know that it's like unfolding, and if for it to work for me, I've got to go there. I've got to go be this, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I totally do. I really, really do, in the sense that I've started this podcast, and I mean, against better judgment, I'll be honest and say I don't have training in, I don't come out of, I am not particularly, I think I was in a standard 4 play. I think that was about it. There is no acting ability here. Nada. And so I'm not a performer at all, or understand all that is required. And if I allow myself to think about all the things I am doing wrong and how many I've said in an interview, I actually want to crawl under the bed, suck my thumb, and have a big fat cry. So I don't, and I just pretend. And but I love it. I love everything about it. And if I think about not sharing all of the amazingness in terms of all the people I get to meet, I'm like, oh no, what's and so I definitely understand that vulnerability, and that I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing, but it's super exciting, and you just can't help rolling with it and being bold along, but at the same time being able to set those boundaries, which I picked up on what you said in terms of going from workaholic male kind of energy now to this feminine, calm, connected, flowing with a lighter, softer energy, and setting boundaries. So what are the boundaries that you've needed to put in place?
So I think my boundaries around who I am, what I want, and how I conduct myself in the way around that, I feel like that it has got clearer and clearer, and I feel good there. And it's probably around the amount of self-discovery and shadow work that I've done over the years. But the one that I think that I'm only now learning, or getting to, I don't even think it's there completely, but it's something that I really had to work on. And I think that it was part of what was also going wrong in parts of the other business, is this boundary around clear exchange, because I think I had this thing with, I'm sure everyone's heard the line, please may we have a coffee so I can pick your brain. And I used to get that sort of on a weekly, if not more than that, basis. And I was all yes, sure, just wanting to give. And it got so extreme within our industry that I think I became known. I think there was like, people actually discussed it, that, if you need somebody who will set you on your path for free, Wendy is it. So I'd literally almost give people the blueprint of how to get going as a creator and how to develop it, and then even, help them develop the ideas and then connect them to people. And most of the time I did all of that for nothing. And, it was time, but I was generous, but also wanting to share for whatever reason. And I think a lot of it was actually self-worth. So it was my needing, this is also my third or fourth career down the line. And I suppose I wanted to feel like by sharing my knowledge, maybe there was, some way that people would acknowledge me as well. So there was this self-worth thing going on in that. So that was a tough boundary to really learn. But then it took really working on that self-worth. And I think I really sort of got that lesson where things were horribly out of balance, where I was no longer the one who was actually able to go and afford to go to the markets and take my IP out there anymore. And I was in danger of having, the house being lost and the banks were closed. And it was at that moment that I finally was like, right, you've got to actually get your shit together. You've got to put some boundaries in place. And learn about exchange. And exchange doesn't have to always be monetary, but it must be much healthier. So that's one of the big ones for me, I think.
I think that's a great one, because it's such a tricky one, I think, in terms of there's a fine line between, cool, let's sit down and have a coffee and gladly, sure, pick my brain. But
yes,
it's what happens after the coffee, how many emails are maybe sent, or are you reading content and then giving feedback on it, how the details that you are sharing and putting forward, or the people that you're putting in contact with, and all of that kind of then comes thereafter. That is possibly, maybe that's where the line is, like post the coffee date. I don't know, like, there's a great opportunity for business. I chatted to a woman in the fashion industry, actually, and she was saying how what she did was that she would then request from whoever she put in touch with a commission or a finder's fee. And in that way, when she ended up taking maternity, she still had income coming in, because she had set that up, and she's actually left the client and she's still earning that income. So I mean, yeah, good for her. So there's that fine line of, absolutely, one does need to connect within the industry and tit for tat, share ideas, share
absolutely
issues. But there's that,
but have a boundary somewhere.
Boundary, and so difficult to work out. And if some people can be quite manipulative, but within one's industry, to try and find where that line is and go, sorry, I'd love to share that with you, however, how I work is X, Y, and Z,
yes, exactly.
do that with kindness and not be
and just and just open directness. I mean, I've loved that you've given that example, because I've had this experience or opportunity to put this new boundary in place just in the last few weeks, where somebody came back from the past and was like, can you help me with? And in the past, I did plenty to help. And this time I went, okay, but I actually need a side hustle. Yes, I'm very connected and able to maybe pointing out some people, finding a contact. I'll do that and I'll spend the time. But then here's the deal. I'll get a commission and I'll actually get it and speak to the content creator. And so I immediately worked it out. And he responded, because I came from almost a place of excitement, and worth, if you know what I mean. I didn't feel bad about it. It just seemed natural, having fixed those boundaries. And then he was excited about it. It was really interesting. He was like, okay, great, let's do that. So it was brilliant. And it was like, finally, I figured out, and that was what I was saying. It's like a different way
of
doing things. Having put all these things in place.
Because it goes back to that thing of that value. And if someone values, they will pay, or they will exchange, or they will barter, whatever the case is. And what you have is valuable. And so they will dig.
And when you, yeah,
Pull out.
but you know what? I had to figure out that what I had was valuable. I had no idea. So that was the game.
That is
So
there.
it was only then, yeah, that I think it can shift.
Amazing. But I think your process has given you that.
Very much so, yeah.
And maybe that unbundling process has shown you that your value is inherent. You don't need to be seen as X, Y, and Z within the industry. It's
yeah,
have it.
Yeah, don't need the labels or the anything. Yeah,
yeah.
Just do it. Be yourself in it. Yeah.
Amazing. What a divine process. I'm sure going through it, it's always that thing to get to the other side you need to go through, and the going through is always think of like you'll laugh at me. Always think of like a poo tunnel, you know? You need to go through the sewage line to get out the other side. But getting through that stinky poo part is just not great.
Oh,
so
no.
I'm sure
I really felt like it was like, for me, it was like a shredder, like you were paper going through a paper shredding machine. And, you know, it was painful at times. And you were literally, it's just stripping away too. And then you're left with all the shreds of paper on the floor. And if you feel like putting something back together again, then you do, but you pick them up consciously, if that makes sense, and see what fits in a new way. So it's reimagining it. Yeah,
I know. And it's quite a throwaway statement in like a yoga class, I find, because it's quite overused. But there's that, you know, yoga teachers will spout forth, and let go of that which no longer serves you. I'm sure we've all heard that.
Yes, exactly.
But it is exactly that. It's that which doesn't serve you. You leave that piece of paper on the floor.
Yeah.
And you take what's worth.
And I think you do that. I think you have to do that every day. So it becomes a point of like almost moment by moment. Part of this sort of being in flow is this like being present, but then also going, okay, so what can I get? It's like, it felt like I was for a while just in this, and still at time, in this continuous giving up. And can I let that go? Can I let that go? And how does that serve me? Doesn't it? Can I give that up? You know, it's sort of, and it just challenges all of your beliefs and your points of views and where you're rigid, and just gets you into this more fluid space, I suppose. But it's like a constant thing. That's so when they say yes and let that, if that doesn't serve you, let that go. Yes, but it's like, and in this moment, on repeat.
Exactly. That's why you keep getting on the mat, you know, because if it was so easy to let it go, you would go to one yoga class and stand for life. So yeah, exactly. Oh, I always feel like it's an hour by hour situation, actually, to be honest. So yeah, that's just how that life process goes. So Wendy, I suppose I wanted to ask you, you know, in terms of someone, well, actually, let me take a step back. In kind of doing all these interviews, what we've realized is that most people say that before starting their business, they've had to dig deep. It's been so interesting. No matter industry, no matter woman, no matter whatever, it's that dig deep and find your core values. And so we've actually done like a core values worksheet and a little podcast around it. So I'm so glad that you say exactly that. I'm like, phew, okay, cool. That was a good idea. So, you know, that's available, and meditation as well. So, you know, to get into that mindset. But I suppose in terms of say you kind of figure out, you've got your core values, you know what you want to do. Next step, you want to take on your business. What would be your suggestion to someone in terms of, okay, so you've got your core values, you know, what do you take with you to make that leap into a business? It's a hard one.
That's a good question. So you've got your core values, and then like for me, it's, I mean, obviously it's going to be so personal for everyone, but it's the connection to what do you love doing? with all of your skills and you know, what excites you in the world and the things that really terrify you, possibly those the most. And then having a look at what have you been avoiding. If you're anything like me, it's like this path has actually been right here in front of me, but I've like diverted from it slightly. And it's subtle, which is what I was saying, is so I've avoided this direct path, if you like, of bringing myself forward and sharing myself. So it's like finding that alignment. You've done your values, and then you put it into, right, what is this offering that I'm bringing into the world? It's like how I did it. So like, what am I? I've got what I'm good at. I can see the things I'm scared of. I can see the things that really excite me. I'm going to follow this breadcrumb trail to bliss, if you like, which I think is really important, and make sure that I include the things that I'm avoiding, and I play my own hand at the same time. So, you know, make sure that all the time you're playing your hand, not anyone else's, because that's how life works. It's rigged in a way that it works for you, not as you as anyone else. So that authenticity is so important. And then really feel like, okay, so this is what my offering is, and then how am I going to bring that to the world, I suppose. So for me, in the way that I'm doing it, is like, okay, so how can I remember that I'm in this new feminine flow? So every time holding that as my compass, and then holding my values as my, you know, holding, almost creating like a lighthouse of things as my beacon of who I am, you know. So I've always got something to hold me to, and I've always done that in a way. I think when I was with doing the work with Dr. Demartini, it was very much of creating a vision that's really aligned with your values. And when you align with your values, it becomes easier to motivate yourself, etc. But if you've got this core like lighthouse of your values, what you care about, and why you're doing it. So if you create this strong why, no matter where you are now out in the middle of the ocean, because that's actually where we're asked to go, right? We're being sent. If you've got a boat, you're really lucky. I don't think you're going to have any oars. If you've still got them, you're really lucky, but be prepared to throw them in the sea as well. But whilst you're out there in the unknown that, you know, you're going to embrace, if you have got your lighthouse, which is ultimately within you, it's no longer at the shore because we're not going back. You remember these core things, and they're going to guide you. So these core things of, this is my vision, this is what I care about, this is who I really am, and this is why I'm here in the world, and how can I show up as that. And for me, it's become about how can I show up in order to benefit humanity, or offer something back to humanity. So it's like, I'm really now at a point where, yes, I've had so much fun expressing myself, but now I have to get like really clear about who I really am. I have always been aligned with someone who wants to share, I would say teach, but it's not really teach as much as like share, to offer other people insight or guidance through my own life experience, because I've had this really personal, hugely rich life experience that I would like to share from, in order to better the world in a way, or just bring value to other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Absolutely. I was kind of trying, I was picturing myself on this boat, and I'm like, you know, Cape Storm kind of thing, without all, and just standing there and going, I wonder what that would feel like. Like, I get seasick, so I kind of have a sense of what that would feel like. But
me too. Yeah.
but how, pretending I'm not seasick, I'm just terrified. And how, like, what, when I look inside, and you know, you feel that lighthouse here, kind of there in your sternum, you know, in that chakra. How does that feel, and what are those values that you are holding on to for dear life? And I love that image. I'm going to personally actually take that and see what I can do with that. So I think you answered me just fine. I'm sorry if it didn't answer anybody else, but that was great. I absolutely sounded with what you said in terms of how you go forward. And once you are stripped bare and you just have your values, what are those things that are going to keep you afloat? And I think that's beautiful. So yeah, I'm sure that will be very helpful for everybody. So Wayne, where can anyone find you? How do they connect with you? And what can you offer them when they connect with you?
So I've got a new website up, a new shiny one in the last 2 months, which is www.theflowlife.net, which has a lot of my offerings on it, but it's also sort of this container of this new direction of where I'm going, the core nucleus being, you know, me in my flow life. And there's a blog, so if you want to learn more about how I find my flow in my fears or whatever, the blogs are on there, and also the core offerings, which would be in flow coaching, which is really creating the sort of personal recipe for yourself. Because for everyone it's going to be completely personal, and how you know, so you can get into this flow recipe for yourself, so you can step into an ease of that in your life, being like the water, unafraid. So that flow coaching, or I offer art life coaching, which is what I said I did that certification in. So I absolutely love that. And I think for teenagers, that's particularly beneficial because they don't love to talk. But I've done a couple of sessions with adults and they also absolutely love doing it. It's just this way of, especially now for anxiety, calming yourself down. And it's also a real entry point into the now moment. So just being present, and it helps in a myriad of ways of just really reducing calm and being present, which is what we all need, again, to access that flow. Then I offer some talks. I've been doing some talks to film schools. I would like to do retreats as soon as we can all see each other again, and workshops, etc.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be launching, there is the online course, which is the Character Dive, which is ongoing and people can join and take part in that. But also then I'm I have turned the Character Dive, as I said, into an ebook. So I'm going to be launching that soon. I haven't got quite a date for exactly when I will have launched it online, but you know, if they follow, I'm also on Facebook at The Flow Life, or just my personal account, Wendy Spinks, or Instagram is Wendy Spinks. But if they go to my website, theflowlife.net, there's all sorts of ways of contacting from there. And I am at the moment being very good in keeping it updated and, you know, easy. This time using an easy website builder that I myself can do, not rely on anyone else. Yeah.
And it's such a thing, isn't that such a thing? And I always think that I'm going to be able to run my website, and then I go into the back end and I'm like, oh crisis, no, not even WordPress.
Yeah.
Simple enough for me, I'm afraid. But good on you. That's great. I'm glad.
Yes. Was there anything? Was the question, wasn't it? Where can they get hold of me? And what am I doing? Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And there's some products that I'm offering, which, you know, I'm trying to build up a bit of a flow of different revenue streams in different ways, but all have it really around this, almost like I'm not wanting to create necessarily a brand, but it's like a flow lifestyle, if you like, with me and my core values and offerings at the center of it. And then I found some products that I thought were gorgeous, that I've put and felt really aligned and connected, that I've put on my shop side of the page on the website, which is some CBD products, mantra oils, and what else do they? The Hempworks have got a whole range of different products, and also these fabulous things. Ella and I love them. They're these oral sprays that are like vitamin sprays, or, you know, enhancer, immune boosters, or what have you, and that they sell. So those products are on the line. So I'm trying to get things going, you know, that all makes sense to me, And, you know, I have a little personal story of why I'm also using CBD oil, you know. So everything that I'm doing, I'm just really trying to make sure that it's authentic. So being that, I think my core value right now is how can I show up authentically and offer that, you know.
Brilliant. And I think, you know, it stems, well, rather goes back to that center, that core value, that knowing what that thing is, that lighthouse, how
Yes.
you see it.
Yeah.
And then everything that kind of pulls out or grows out from that, but in alignment with those core
Yeah.
values, and being able
Yeah.
to always go, does it work? Does it plug in? Does it grow out? You know, if it doesn't, then, you know, it doesn't belong.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then from there, you can have multiple streams of income from various
Yeah.
different things, but
Yeah.
it's still kind of coming from the same source. So,
and for me, very much, it's like for me right at the beginning of all of this, and I'm literally playing with it. So I'm trying to be as adaptable as possible, making sure everything that I've researched or brought in is super aligned, as we said, but also like I'm not stuck to it or married to any of it. I'm like, let's see what flows, right? So it's like, okay. And it's interesting because I set all of this up before COVID hit. So it's like so fascinating to me how I was going remote. I was going to be able to work from wherever I was at any desk or wherever I lived. And in this way, offering all these things. And it was just incredible how it timed with COVID. And then it's like, oh my word, what my offering is actually really valuable. It could help people.
yeah.
Yeah.
So okay.
It was, yeah. So I suppose that's again just following our intuition, right?
Exactly.
It works. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Wens. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I Work For Me podcast. It's such a pleasure. And I'm hoping we'll get to chat to you again and see how things have progressed. So yeah, in 6 months, a year, who knows? And you can
see where I flowed off to.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Oh, thank you, love. Take care. Bye.